dedicated to each and every one of you who appreciate a great glass of wine. You know what I mean?
It's Monday. Let's raise a glass to the beginning of another week. It's time to unscrew, uncork, or saber a bottle, and let's begin exploring the wine glass. Today, I am sharing with you a Zoom event I attended about Bordeaux Terroir. Terroir is defined as the complete natural environment in which a particular wine is produced, including factors such as the soil, topography, and climate. It also relates to the characteristic taste and flavor imparted to a wine by the environment in which it is produced. Bordeaux is a very regulated wine region, and I am a believer that you can taste their soils in the glass. Whether you are in a left or right bank, within the AOCs there are differences that present themselves in the glass. Join me as I learn more about the soils of Bordeaux in this seminar presented by Benchmark Wine. Please take a moment to swipe to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, and don't forget to tell your wine-loving friends about exploring the wine glass. Hey everybody, I'm Lori Budd, a UC Davis winemaking program, Sommelier Service, and WSET Level 2 graduate. You can find Exploring the Wine Glass on all the socials, as well as your favorite podcast catchers. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to swipe, subscribe, rate, and review. I promise I'll never tell you what to drink, but I'll always share what's in my glass.
Red wine, give me the blush.
First, I would like to introduce Wendy Narby, who is one of our Bordeaux experts, who has been on webinars in the past, so hopefully you know her. But hi, Wendy.
Hi, thank you very much, Shelley. So I'm going to be behind the scenes answering questions. So
now I am so thrilled to introduce Jane Anson, who really doesn't need an introduction. If you've ever Googled any topics on Bordeaux, you're sure to have found her work and her writings. Jane is a contributing editor and Bordeaux expert for Decanter, and she's also an author. Her most recent book is Inside Bordeaux. I have my copy here. As I like to say, it's my quarantine companion, the best one I've had. So Jane, without further ado, I'd love to pass it off to you and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for asking me to be with you this evening. It is for us 7 o'clock at night in Bordeaux. As you can see, it's nighttime. We really feel like winter is coming in Bordeaux. So thank you. One of the reasons why I was asked to talk about terroir is because it's one of the main themes that I talk about in Inside Bordeaux in the book that you've just seen. And David Pernay, who I have asked to join us tonight, was part of the scientific advisory team for the book, because what I tried to do was to take all of the research that had been out there about terroir in Bordeaux, as this is one part of the book of how I'm trying to approach in a kind of a new way talking about Bordeaux chateaux. And I went to the earth because I really wanted to translate what was out there for those of us who are not soil scientists, who are not the agricultural engineers, and to try and make sense of what does all of this mean in the glass? What does it mean for those of us who want to actually drink Bordeaux wine and choose different kinds of Bordeaux wine? So David very kindly was part of that team of experts. Now, he is a consultant. He's an agricultural engineer. He's a consultant here. And I think, David, almost 20 years ago now, you founded your own consultancy business. I think yes, 2002, exactly. Is that right?
19, exactly. 19.
So that's called So Vivant. And he works across Bordeaux with many different estates, but he does a lot of audits and analysis of different vineyards. So often when he starts, you'll tell us about this, but when you start with a client, one of the things you'll do is actually get out into the vineyard and see what's happening. Could we actually start off with you just telling us a bit about that process? What does a client normally ask you, and what do you do?
Well, in fact, people ask us some help for different reasons. It can be to become organic. It can be to increase the quality of their wine, to have a better understand of their terroir. Anyway, the way we have to proceed is first to understand the specification of the place, of each place, each property. because it's our way to see wine, and it's the case in Bordeaux. It's to help the property to produce a wine which is really specific to the place it is produced. And it's to understand the specification of the terroir, to know the geologic aspect in each part of the vineyard, to know the evolution of each substrate, geological substrate, to know which kind of soil, if it's some soil very young or very evaluated. And all this aspect will lead to some specification, some characteristic on the wine. And it's our target to have the best way to produce grapes, and then for the vinification, to make clear this link between the wine characteristic and the soils from where it comes.
Okay, thank you. That's brilliant. So that's just to give an overview of what it means today to be a soil scientist. So I thought that I would take you guys through a bit of a presentation about what does it mean? What does terroir mean in Bordeaux today? And as I go, I'm going to ask David questions and bring him in at certain points. And we'll do this it'll be about 40 minutes or so. And then we're going to hand it over to questions from you guys. And yeah, do ask as many questions as possible, be as specific as possible. David is truly, truly an expert. It's such a great opportunity to have him here to ask questions. So one of the things that when I started off doing this book, I wanted to look at Bordeaux as it is today. I wanted to look at what was changing. And I couldn't escape from the fact that 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, people weren't really taking the idea of terroir seriously in Bordeaux. And I don't mean the winemakers or the consultants. I mean, those of us who are looking at Bordeaux from the exterior. What we're used to thinking is that Bordeaux is about big brands. And it's one of the things that is really exciting in the region today is that it's taking ownership of its terroir in a way that I think it hasn't necessarily done previously. So if I just start by saying, what does it mean? I can remember being at a conference about organic wines about 6 years ago. And there were people from Spain, from Italy, from southern France, from Burgundy. There was nobody from Bordeaux there. And when the name Bordeaux was mentioned, there was an audible kind of laughter in the room about the idea that Bordeaux could have terroir. And it really kind of made me cross, but living here and knowing that that's not the case, and really kind of crystallized to me a lot of this approach that I wanted to do inside Bordeaux. So historically, Bordeaux has not necessarily been its best champion in terms of terroir. We look at the region's flagship classification, which is 1855. It wasn't ranked according to the type of soil. It was ranked according to the price that the chateaus had gained in the marketplace. Now, there's no question that part of the reason they had gained that price was because of where they were located and because of the soils which they made the wine, but that wasn't the image that was given. So, and the brand is classified in 1855. So what that means is Lafite Rothschild may have been 50 or 60 hectares in 1855. In fact, you can see it's 74 hectares in 1855, but it's able to increase in size to buy other parts of land from around Pauillac and still call them Lafite. They are actually very careful about not putting all of that in the first wine, but again, it gives the impression that Bordeaux is more about brands than it is about soils. Saint-Emilion, over on the right bank, Saint-Emilion as part of its classification, does include questions of terroir. So in fact, Angelus or Ozone, they have special parts of their vineyard which are classified. And if they do buy more land within Saint-Emilion, that actually does not automatically go into the classified part. They're allowed to ask next round, because that's every 10 years, they're allowed to ask for it to be included, but it's not automatic. But they also include things like car parking and tourism. So that again kind of dilutes this message of terroir. Okay, and again, moving on from that, there are other things that work against Bordeaux in the idea of terroir. And one of them is that you don't have, in Burgundy, it's fairly simple. You have a part of land, a designated plot, which is corresponding to one designated wine. And then if there's another wine, it's called something different entirely from a different plot. Whereas what happens in Bordeaux is you have first wine, second wine, sometimes third wines. And again, this image for consumers is, can that really be from, can it be one estate with one terroir if you have so many different named wines from the same estate? What often happens in Bordeaux is that the owners maybe live in Paris, or they live wherever, but then it's have a director in charge of vineyards. The owners often make financial decisions, but they don't make decisions about the orientation of the vineyard rows or the exact grape variety mix. What they do is they ask experts like David, they ask experts like their viticulturalist or etc. But it doesn't give the image of a man and his wine, or a woman and her wine, close to the land in the way that you feel it in places often like Burgundy. Again, appellation system doesn't always help. You have the two big appellations in Bordeaux are AOC Bordeaux, AOC Bordeaux Superior, and they make over half of all of the production of the region, and yet they can be from anywhere. So I have a little map of Bordeaux behind me. You can see lots of different colours which are corresponding to all of the different appellations, but AOC Bordeaux or AOC Bordeaux Superior can actually come from any of those colours. You can choose, you don't in theory, but you can choose to make it wherever you are. And there are certain big stretches where you have to if you're making a red wine. Again, sales system. The sales system here tends to go through a négociant. You have a broker and a négociant. And what that means is that between the winemaker and the final consumer, there are 3 different layers. And it can, even if you are very carefully making your wine according to terroir and you're organic or biodynamic or etc., it's not you normally who is telling the consumer that. So it can kind of give you this gap, which doesn't necessarily help Bordeaux in terms of its image of being close to the land. And finally, on this slide, there are less winemakers now than there were 10 years ago. And the reason for that is because the estates are getting bigger. And again, if estates are getting bigger, that there's a question over how true to terroir, the traditional view of terroir, can they be. And my final thing, before we get on to why, yes, we absolutely should believe in Bordeaux terroir, is that this is a blended wine. So the vast, vast majority of Bordeaux wines are not from a single grape variety. They tend to be from vineyard holdings that extend 40, 50, 100 hectares with a ton of different soil types. And the grapes are planted mainly according to soil type, but also partly, certainly historically, because of appellation typicity. And what I mean by that is, for a long time, AOC Listrac in the Medoc planted a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon because that was a fashionable grape to have in the Medoc. That happened a lot in the 70s and the 80s. And it's only now that they're going back to planting a bit more Merlot because the lot of the land there actually works much better for Merlot. If you look back in history to when Listrac was first became an AOC, then they did have a lot of Merlot as well, because at the time they were looking for what was working in that appellation. But over time, the kind of fashionable side of Cabernet Sauvignon overtook. So that can kind of take away from this idea of matching soil to grape variety. That has very much changed now. And then you have sometimes owners who particularly liked a certain grape. So the Mial family, there was a guy in the middle of the 20th century who loved Merlot. So if you go to Siran, to Pichon-Comtesse, to Parma, that family owned those estates, and all 3 of those estates have more Merlot than a lot of their neighbours. And that was partly because he loved that grape. So all of those things don't always help. However, there has been a real change since really the last 2 decades in terms of ensuring that Bordeaux is really up to date in terms of matching those things, matching soil to grape variety. But terroir is a lot more than that. And I'm going to head back over to David here, because this kind of description of terroir here, a cultivated ecosystem in which the vine interacts with soil and climate. That comes from one of David's colleagues, Kees van Leeuwen, who's a professor here. So I would like to just head over to David and ask you, how would you describe terroir? What does terroir actually mean for in Bordeaux?
First, when we speak about terroir in a defined wine region, it's more about soil, because we think that climate is homogeneous and the way people are proceeding and the vineyard structure is quite homogeneous. So when we speak of terroir in a region as Bordeaux, it's more about soil specification, geologic specification, more than about practices or even more about climate. Even if we know that some parts of Bordeaux area are more early ripening than other. All the parts which are close from the river are earlier ripening than other parts, more on the west side or more inside in the northeast of the region, the Bordeaux region. So, but it's mainly about soil, and even we can talk about early soil and late soil. The more the soil takes time to warm up in spring, the more the vine cycle will be long, and so it will make it take more time for the berries to be properly ripened. So
by that you mean a cooler soil?
Sorry?
But by that you mean a cooler soil. Yes, will take longer.
Take more time. First for the bud burst, and then even for the ripening. The two main things that makes earlier cycle, it's first the ability of the soil to warm up, and then the ability of the soil to induce some hydric stress on the vines, because hydric stress is the most important variable to make the tannin soft. And more you have some hydric stress in moderate situation, the more the tannin will be soft. That's why tannin will be soft and in short time. That's why if we talk about terroir, different terroir, we can define three main situations. The oldest one is some limestone, the basement of all the area. You can have some soils developed directly on this limestone on the right bank, especially on Saint-Emilion, on the top part of Saint-Emilion. You have to know that you can have some oldest soil, oldest geologic substrate on higher parts. So it is the case in Saint-Emilion. In Saint-Emilion, the top part of Saint-Emilion is that's where we find the oldest geologic substrate. So it's Asteri limestone, and it's some soil which are quite cold, because there's some high level of clay inside, and so the more you have some clay, the more the soil will fix water, and the more it will take time to warm up. And although this limestone is able to release some water for the ripening season, and so it makes some very moderate, low to moderate hydric stress. So it makes times vines will take times to have some very well ripened tannin, and so soft tannin. On the opposite, you have the gravelly soil, which are closer to the river because they came from the deposit of the river, at the opposite of the first one, which were deposit on the under sea, under the sea. So the gravel have been deposited from the river, and so it was so there's different terraces defined. So from a bit more 1 million years ago to 100,000 years ago. And so these gravelly soils, first, it was gravel with sand. Thanks to some old periods with very hot condition, the top part of the gravel terraces had been destroyed by the tropical condition. This tropical condition destroyed the more sensitive gravel, and they release some clay. So it makes on this top part of gravelly soil some very compact mix of sand, gravel, and clay, very compact, like concrete for summer times. In this soil, it's very difficult for the roots to get inside. And so they are very sensitive to hydric stress. And on these soils, which are in which we have a lot of gravel, a lot of porosity, the soils get warm very early in spring. So first aspect of earliness, and then vines will have more hydric stress for the ripening season, and it is a second aspect for earliness because this hydric stress will make tannin become soft earlier. So that's why we have and you have to understand that time between veraison and harvest is very short on this type of soil, and we have to be more patient on the first type of soil, on the limestone, because it makes more time for the tannin to become soft. So if we maintain the same time between veraison and harvest on these two types of soil, on the second type, on the limestone soils, we will have some rusticity, some coarse tannin, and so we have to be more patient, to take more time to be ripened.
That's brilliant. That's a very, very clear description. And what that also tells me is there is a human element to terroir. I mean, it's important to kind of bear that in mind. There is a human element to it because there are people making those choices. You know, what you do with your terroir makes a difference. So yes, so we're about to go and look at how Bordeaux is, you know, what are the different geological things that we're looking at. So we have a poll question, first of all, for you guys. What do you think? Where do the lowest spots of the Bordeaux vineyards sit? Do you think they are at sea level? Are they 14 meters or are they 20 meters? So the lowest.
The lowest.
Oh, don't worry, David, you don't do. This is for the people who are watching. Don't give it away. Okay, cool. So we have got 53% at sea level. And then, okay, great. Well done, everybody. You are correct. Most of it starts at 14 meters, but there are one or two vineyards which are literally right along the river edge. There's one called La Vieille Chapelle, which is on the right bank, quite near to Fronsac. It's in appellation AOC Bordeaux Soup, but it's quite near to Fronsac, and it's right along the water's edge. And one of the fascinating things about that place is that there are some pre-phylloxera vines. There are some vines that have been there since the end of the 19th century, which they're only just today finding out what the grape varieties are. They've just done some DNA testing to properly identify the grapes, which they thought were Merlot, but they turn out to be, I forget what exactly now, but a much, much older grape. And the reason that they have survived that long is because it was at sea level, and so it flooded during phylloxera, which was one of the things that people tried to do, and it didn't work on any kind of a major scale. But because they were naturally down there, and they were naturally in an area that could flood, then their vines, that particular plot of old vines survived. So fascinating. So I'm going to talk you through a little bit about what we're dealing with this map behind, what exactly we're looking at. Bordeaux is probably about 4 times the size of Burgundy, a little bit more, but it is the largest fine wine region in France, as you all know, of course. But if you actually break down, what does that mean? So 213 kilometers north to south, 105 kilometers east to west. Now, I here have 114,000 hectares as of 2016, but even since then, in the last 4 years, that has actually gone down a little bit more. I think today we're on just over 110,000, maybe 111,000, because they are pulling up parts of the Bordeaux region which they don't think are good enough quality. So they're really trying to refocus to ensure that what you're getting when you buy Bordeaux is this much more consistent quality. So that has gone down, but actually, I think over the last 2 years, it's really stabilized. So we're probably going to stay at about 110,000. There are 65 different appellations. And as David was very clearly showing us, those different appellations have very different soil types. Now, my own personal feeling is the reason for years that we didn't really talk about terroir in Bordeaux is because it's so complicated. There are so many different kind of parameters to go by. So if we just talk here, what are the basics? What are the things that we all are told when we first learn about Bordeaux? Clearly, left bank versus right bank. Now, those things that David was talking about in terms of the late ripening, the early ripening soils, generally speaking, you have the gravel versus the clay. Sorry, so we've got the two rivers, the Garonne, which kind of is the backbone, going mainly to marking out the left bank. And then you have the Dordogne, which is mainly marking out the right bank. They meet about Margaux. So about Bly on the right-hand side and Margaux on the left-hand side is pretty much where those two rivers meet. And then it heads off to the sea. And then this idea of gravel versus clay. Gravel is mainly left bank, clay mainly right bank. This is, again, what we're told when we're first learning about Bordeaux. And then we're also learning Cabernet Sauvignon, mainly left bank, Merlot, mainly right bank. And we're told it's all about brands, and Bordeaux is designed to talk about either good vintages or bad vintages. So that is your kind of 101. Here you are. This is what we're going to know about Bordeaux. So let's go on to our next slide and see what really happens. So this really is what David was talking about. The two different banks are different geological ages. Exactly as he said, there are some soil types which are much older than others. They're different heights. The left bank is much lower than the right bank. The right bank goes right up to 140 meters about. The right bank, the Medoc only goes up to 35 meters maximum. You have Sauternes that goes up to about 75 meters. So, but it is generally speaking much lower than the right bank. And then you have this kind of body of land which sits in between the two rivers, which is called Entre deux Mers. If it was called Entre deux Rivières, it might be much clearer for everybody who's learning about Bordeaux, but basically it means it's between the Dordogne and the Garonne. And then again, as just breaking down what David was telling us, you have these different soil types that are coming partly from the Pyrenees Mountains, really coming down from the Garonne, partly from the Massif Central in the middle of France, which goes down the Dordogne River, and you get dozens or hundreds of soil types. And we're told that Cabernet Sauvignon is the king of Bordeaux, but actually the reality when you look is that Merlot is 66% of plantings. It's a lot. It covers a lot of Bordeaux, but it's becoming more complicated. We will talk about climate change later. We'll talk about the impact that different terroir has on climate change. And the reality of Bordeaux vintages is it's absolutely not good or bad. They're reflecting the complexities of these different soil types with different grape varieties and what works best where. And personally, I like to think about vintages as, is it an early drinking vintage? Is it a long aging vintage? Is it a vintage which favors cooler areas? Is it a vintage which favors the warmer early ripening areas? So this is, the stuff that becomes really fascinating, I think. And what I love as well, when you start to look at the actual reality, the detail of Bordeaux terroir, is that you realize it isn't just clay right bank, gravel left bank. And what you start finding are these really unusual areas that can give you really wonderful, delightful wines that you maybe wouldn't have thought about, or you wouldn't know why they taste the way they do until you start to make sense of the terroir that they're sat on. So again, we thought left bank or gravel. In fact, there's plenty of limestone, there's plenty of clay over on the left bank, and there's a couple of areas. There's an area here called Pujol, which is near to Sauternes, but this is a dry white wine. because there's a lot of limestone. There's really a beautiful plateau of limestone, Bordeaux-Terroir, and there's a fantastic white wine, which I recommend you trying if you can do, which is called Clos Floriden. And that has, it's a limestone-based, a brilliant Sauvignon Blanc that's worth trying just to see what good white you can make. And in fact, I'm going to ask David in a moment, but just a little bit further south from there, you've got the appellation of Sauternes, which is known for its sweet wines, but there is some brilliant limestone in Barsac. Barsac is one of the communes of the Sauternes appellation, and Barsac is packed full of great limestone and could, I'm absolutely sure, does already make some brilliant white wines. And we're seeing more and more dry whites coming out of Sauternes because people are willing, more than they were maybe historically, to look at their terroir and think, what actually is this best suited for? How can I make the most of it? I was speaking with Kees van Leeuwen, who's one of David's colleagues recently, and his suggestion is that there could be fantastic reds made in Sauternes because, or in Barsac, sorry, because there's limestone. And you think about Saint-Emilion. Saint-Emilion has a lot of really astonishing, great red wines made on limestone. So anyway, so this slide, which you guys may get, I'm not sure if you'll see it afterwards, but there are parts of the Medoc which have clay. You'll find 100% Merlot in some parts of the Medoc. And the further you go up north in the Medoc, closer towards the ocean, you again get great white wines. Over on the right bank, we think of it all being clay, but you have a lot of gravel. You have gravel over, and it's not a lot actually, but you have spots of gravel. You've got very famously Figeac and Cheval Blanc in Saint-Emilion, which are among a sea of clay and limestone, and they have this really very beautiful clay and gravel soils, which make their very particular and incredible wines. So David, is that something that you find as a consultant, as somebody who does terroir studies, is that kind of for you a fun part of your job to find these unusual spots?
Yes, but before finding some unusual spot, it's more to understand why, for example, in Saint-Estèphe, you have some, when you think to left bank, for example, from Margaux to Saint-Estèphe, you can see that geologically you will find mainly some gravel on all the left bank. When, as you told, you will see that more you go in the north, more you will have some important surface on limestone. But before this surface on limestone, you have the basement of the gravelly soil, which will be with heavy clay, which are so important in some properties as Château Latour or Château Cos d'Estournel. And on this property, even if the main part of the blend is Cabernet Sauvignon on gravelly soils, this Merlot on heavy clay is really a part of their signature. And to understand precisely where these heavy clay are situated, if they are partially covered by gravel or some sand, which part will it be more the heavy clay which will define the way the vine will behave? It's some things which are really important to define the way, first, the type of vegetal material you have to plant. I mean, to define the rootstock, the right rootstock, which will lead to the right level of vigor thanks to this type of substrate, to define the right varieties. Because if you plant, even if you are on south exposed slope, if you plant some Cabernet Sauvignon on this heavy clay, you will have most of the time not so good results than you will have with Merlot. So before finding new situation, great situation, it's more about to well understand vine behavior in each point of the property to adapt, to have the best way to technically define the process from planting to the vinification, adapted to the specification of each soils we can find.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Dracaena Wines loves to give back. There are so many fur babies that deserve to find their forever home. We would love to be able to help as many as possible. If you are part of a nonprofit organization or know of a nonprofit organization that would like to hold a fundraiser, please contact us at contact@dracaenawines.com or visit our website, dracaenawines.com, to fill out the form. How does the fundraiser work? It is super simple and costs your group absolutely nothing. Together, we will choose a month that your group will be sponsored. During the month, you promote the fundraiser just like any other event you'd hold. At the end of the month, we will donate 20% of the sales to your organization. The donations will be made in the name of each individual who purchased the wine so that you know exactly who helped the animals. Our goal is to raise as much funds as we possibly can and to help as many animals as possible. So please help us help as many fur babies as we possibly can.
You're making such a brilliant point that I think is worth underlining for people listening. You mentioned two estates there. You mentioned Cos d'Estournel and Château Latour. Now, people who taste Bordeaux regularly, those are both estates which are known for having very dense, powerful, long-aging wines. And they're often talked about in terms of their power. Now, I think it can be quite... you look at that and you might think that's a personal choice of the people who are making the wine there. But you make the brilliant point that they both have a lot of clay among their gravel. And when you have clay, what that often means is you have power naturally. And you can compare it. I often love to compare Lafite against Latour because Lafite has huge amounts of gravel, deep gravel, but less clay than Latour does. And the result that you get in the glass is that Lafite tends to be a bit more understated, a bit more elegant. It takes its time. You've got to go to it in a way that with Latour, it's really very obviously structured, big tannins. It's so majestic. And I think that when you actually start looking at the terroir, you start to understand why those personalities are so different. So I thank you for making that point.
For example, just to finish on this point, on the opposite, for example, in Margaux, Château Palmer, it's one of the great estates where you have very little surface with heavy clay. So it's really mainly topsoil on gravel. And we understand and we make a map of the hydric stress on all the surface of the vineyard. And we can see that more than 80% of the vineyard, more than 80% of the vineyard vines have, for nearly every vintage, some at least moderate stress. And it's really important to understand why on this estate, you have one of the specifications is to have always very silky tannin. It's because of this percentage of the surface with some hydric stress on every vintages, even on the most wet vintages.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I really do think that the more you kind of get into this and understand what's happening underneath, the more pleasure you take from the wines and from learning about them, because all of a sudden things start to fall into place. It's not just about them having had wealthy owners at the right time in their history. It's actually, there's something that you can touch and feel and understand. And I love that. So the reason that we know more is related to this slide. So for those of you watching, I just tried to bring together here the terroir heroes. Who are the people that over the years should we thank for us to learn a little bit more about Bordeaux? Obviously, we could go right back, but I start here with one of the most famous incidents or instances in Bordeaux of human intervention to improve terroir. And I picked one guy, there were many, but a guy called Jan Leegwater, who was Dutch, and he was in Bordeaux in the 1700s. And he was part of a team of people, but he was one of the lead engineers who drained the Medoc. So he was brought as an engineer to understand how to drain the Medoc. And if any of you have been to the Medoc, it's not entirely flat, but it's a relatively flat area, and it's a relatively narrow kind of peninsula. And you have the sea on one side and the river on the other. And for much of its life, most of it was under, not totally underwater, but there were kind of islands, croupes. David talked about the different gravel outcrops that there were in the left bank. There still are very important for understanding quality on the left bank. But for much of the time in the Medoc, it was only really the tops of them that were exposed. And when the Dutch came, as you all know, I'm not going to talk too much about that, but I just wanted to bring that point that he was the guy, or he represents that idea of intervention, draining the Medoc, exposing the gravel. Now, what happened then, my next terroir hero, a guy called Baron de Bran, who owned Mouton Rothschild for a while, he owned Bran Cantenac for a while. He was about at the same time, and what he did was he popularized the matching of Cabernet Sauvignon to that gravel. So particularly in Mouton first, but then he took it down to Bran Cantenac. He realized how good that combination was, which today, is fetishized, the idea of Cabernet Sauvignon and gravel. Everybody loves the idea of it. And he was basically, I read quite a few of the archives of Mouton, and he would tell a lot of his neighbors, plant Cabernet Sauvignon, it works in our soils. So he's really a terroir hero for me. And then I switched to the 20th century. So everyone we've got here, Gérard Séguin, who was a researcher, a professor, was one of the first, as far as I'm aware, to do a full étude des sols, a study of Bordeaux soils, which was then published. It was part of a thesis that he did. He was a very, very long-standing professor at the university here. And he published really one of the first in-depth studies of what are the different parts of Bordeaux like. Lucien Lorton, he is an owner in Margaux, and after the war, and in the 50s and 60s, and really even in the 70s, a lot of the estates in Margaux, and this is again to represent other people doing the same thing in different appellations, but they had lost acreage. People had stopped looking after the vineyards. There wasn't money in it. A lot of even the classified estates were losing, almost went to nothing. And Lucien believed in the potential of Margaux. He did an awful lot of kind of digging down himself to find the best parts of Margaux, and he replanted and he rebought. In fact, he bought a lot of the best bits because he was able to. But he was important from the owner's side. And then my last four people I have here, including David, are the guys who today are at the forefront. They're the soil scientists. They're the consultants. They're the terroir experts. So Kees van Leeuwen, Xavier Chaunet, David Bechelet, and David Benet, who are really working very hard, either, if you look on, either with appellations with the CIVB or with individual chateaus to try and understand better terroir. And this is where I think we are today, modern terroir. It doesn't mean, it will never mean what it means in Burgundy of an individual tiny plot which is named individually and sold, with a couple of 100 bottles. That isn't what Bordeaux is about. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't take terroir seriously, and it doesn't, that there is so much to know here. And it's this idea. You're looking at the climate, you're looking at the temperature, you're looking at the soil, you're looking at the aspect, not just across the vineyard, but exactly as David was saying. Today, what you're looking at is individual plots, individual rows. How does across Monrose, which is 80 hectares or so, how does the vineyard change across the whole area? And therefore, how do we treat it differently? So even 15 years ago, you would have started harvesting from the left-hand side, finishing up on the right-hand side, just going as easily as you can. Today, that is the absolute antithesis of what happens. Today, they will be tracking individual ripening across the entire place, and they will be picking depending on what is needed. And it's more like a zigzag, more like a dance than it was. And this I really love when we think about, if you look at the classified estates, and I actually think we have a question coming up about this. If you look at the classified estates, they are not there by accident. So I'm going to look just at 1855, just at the left bank. Now, David mentioned these terraces. So there are 6 terraces, as David Bechelet, one of those terroir heroes, has kind of identified and named them. And so they're named, just to keep it simple, from terrace 1 to terrace 6. For most of the Medoc, you'll find mainly terrace 3, terrace 4, terrace 5. And the totally unbelievable thing that actually kind of blows your mind when you start to look at it is that of the 61 1855 classified estates, they are all on either terrace 3 or terrace 4. And that is, when I first kind of looked at that and realized it, it was so interesting, because it just blows out the water this idea that they were only famous because they had wealthy owners. It really, really makes you think about the soil, the terroir. So, in fact, David, if you could bring us into here, this is 4 quality soil types as defined by Kees van Leeuwen, and I'm certain you and David Bechelet. So we're talking about the 4 quality soil types of Bordeaux. So could you just talk us a little bit through, what does it mean in the glass to have deep clays? What does it mean to have gravels? And what does it mean to have limestone?
First, so if we start with oldest one, so it will be the soft limestone, so we call molas.
To be fair to David, could we just keep up the definitions, just so that he can see them while he's talking about them? So could we just go back to that last slide? Thank you.
Okay, so the oldest one on all of them, it is the soil for Larcy Ducasse. So it is molas. It is the soil we will find on the south slopes on the right bank on Saint-Emilion, also on Fronsac or Côte de Castillon. So it is the south slopes of this area. So it's a mix of clay, silt, and a little bit of sand. So, but it's clay are dominating. And it's some soils which are with very low evolution. So it's mainly the effect of the subsoil and the geological aspects that that express in the wine. And it's not very the vines can take quite a lot of water in this type of soil. So very moderate stress, low to moderate stress, but very low nitrogen availability. So it is because of this very low nitrogen availability that this wine will have some quite good structure, quite a lot of tannin, and but you have to be patient to harvest them, and this patient is moderate by the fact that they are very well exposed on the south south coast of this right bank. Nearly the same age, it is the clay from Petrus. So it is some heavy clay with very low level of limestone in. It's among gravel terraces. It's because when the gravel deposits on this clay, because the gravel are younger, and with some you have to imagine that some in glaciary period there was some heavy amount of ice on this gravel. It creates some very big pressure, and there's some sort of bubble of clay that came inside the gravel. And so that's why on Petrus you are just on this bubble of clay, and it's very, very heavy clay, about 50% of clay. So it's very difficult for the roots to find air inside. So it's a first stress. So that creates some tannin. Hydric stress, tannin because lack of oxygen in the subsoil, because very little porosity, heavy clay. And then low level of nitrogen. So second qualitative aspect, and as the clay are very present, they fix the water so strongly that it is difficult for the roots to take it. So it's a mix of very powerful wine because of the clay, which creates some lack of oxygen that it's good for the vines to synthesize some tannin. And because of this amount of clay, the water is so strongly fixed by the clay that vines can have some hydric stress, moderate hydric stress for ripening. So you have a mix of conditions creating a lot of tannin, and also hydric situation that makes this tannin very soft. So it is something which is really good for especially for the Merlot.
It's a brilliant description. I think that was one of my favorite descriptions of Petrus. That idea of the bubble coming up between the two gravels is great, because right next door, Le Fleur has got quite a bit of gravel. But I am conscious that we are close, we're just going over where we should be. So can we just more briefly, it's not you, David, that's brilliant. Just with the timing, just more briefly talk about the gravel and the calcosol, the last.
Yes. So calcosol is the next step. So it is a limestone deposit on the under the sea. Because of tectonic, it becomes on the top part, and because it's very hard, it has been not destroyed by erosion. So it's some soils very narrow and very shallow root system. And so you can have some effect of clay and effect of hydric stress, moderate stress, because the root system is very shallow. So it's but it has heavy clay. There's a lot of clay in the topsoil. It makes quite a long time for ripening. So that's why it's not so early ripening than, for example, Lafitte, and more, which is really defined by the gravel. As it's gravelly soil, it's early bud burst, it's early ripening because of hydric stress. So it's really the top soil for Cabernet Sauvignon, because as you know, in Bordeaux area, Cabernet Sauvignon is the latest varieties we have we use, and because of that, we have to plant them on the earlier ripening soil. And so shallow gravelly soil on the left bank, but also on the right bank, as you told before, especially in west of Saint-Emilion, and also in the biggest part of Pomerol, you will find this type of gravelly soil, and you have some hydric stress that makes this situation really great for the Cabernet Sauvignon. It doesn't mean that it's not good for Merlot. It means that it is really on this part that the Cabernet Sauvignon gives the best result because of hydric stress and early ripening.
It's so good. Thank you. Really clear. And this is one of the things that is so interesting about this terroir approach. You really start to dig down into the different personalities. And what I like about that is it tells you what it will fit, what it will taste like. And that's really at the end of the day what we want to know. Okay, so I'm not going to do these next two slides because time-wise, and basically we've been talking about that. And in fact, temperature, we could go over with this as well. But let's just quickly talk about temperature. So right at the beginning, David said that as we can see, there are different soil types, and location will change the temperature variation. So what do you guess, people, about the variation in temperature between different parts of the Bordeaux region? Okay, and as you're quite right, it's 71% of you were right. It's 1.5, and actually I think it can even go higher. But one of the things that's fascinating, if we just quickly go on to the next one, is that there is a consistency to how the temperature changes. So we talk about vintages being warm or cold, and rainy or sunny, etc., etc. But one of the things that's fascinating, and I want us to talk about here about the future of Bordeaux Terroir, is that there's a consistency. Sorry, if I just, for me for 1 second, if we just go back to that last map, I just mean we'll bring those two things together. This is a map by a guy called Benjamin Bois, who did this research. And what he found was exactly as David said earlier, that there are certain parts of Bordeaux that no matter what, in warm vintages or cold vintages, are systematically warmer. So close to the city centre, Pessac-Léognan, that will consistently be warmer. Pomerol, because it's on this kind of riverbed, the Isle riverbed, where you have gravels and the clay, it's consistently warmer than Castillon or Fronsac, etc. over on the right, on the left bank, this kind of strip that you can see, obviously the reds are the warmer bits, this kind of strip along the river, where most of the 61 classified growths tend to be in this warmer strip along the river. Borg and Bly, which is on the opposite side, opposite Margot, again, you have this strip along the river where it's warm. And conversely, you can see here where the green is, where it's the coolest bit. So right over Sainte-Foy-la-Grande, Castillon, etc., it starts to get cooler. In the northern Medoc over on the left bank, it starts to get cooler. Now, if we just switch on to the next slide and talk about the terroir, the really interesting thing about that is it can help you to find where you want to find nice wines, or wines that have been successful in different vintages. But what it can also do, and where I'd like to ask David about this, is in the future, as climate change is having an impact, do you think that certain parts of Bordeaux, where it was an advantage to be warm, is it becoming difficult for them? Is it becoming a handicap to be warm? And yes, Wendy, please come in and ask those questions too.
First, what I would like to say is that the actual evolution is clearly an advantage to produce more regularly some good or very good vintages. So it is very clear. We can see that for the last 10 years. We have more regularly some very good vintage now than 30 or 40 years ago. So we have more regularly some very good ripening for Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet Sauvignon is one of is part of the heart of Bordeaux, and to have the chance to produce more regularly some very good ripened Cabernet Sauvignon is really something which is encouraging for the future. You wrote about Merlot on some very specific and more Merlot on clay, because we can see, for example, on 2018, 19, and 20, because of hydric stress, Merlot on gravelly soil doesn't reach so high level of alcohol, because hydric stress at the moment reduces the photosynthesis, and it makes some doesn't go above 14 degrees of alcohol, percent of alcohol.
I'm going to have to interrupt because I know we've only got a few minutes. You've actually answered more or less all the questions that everybody asked, which is great. But there was one question I think was particularly interesting, but there was lots of interesting questions. So I apologize to people who won't get answers this evening. But clarification on the difference between Cabernet on gravel, and which means we have softer tannins earlier. But then the question mark that's been raised, but Merlot is earlier ripening. So how does that work, the Merlot on clay and the Cabernet on gravel, as far as the
Cabernet on gravel, on Merlot on clay, they are very close ripening, in fact, especially Merlot on limestone. So for instance, even this year, on property, for example, in Saint-Estèphe, where you can find on the same property some limestone and some very gravelly soil, we will pick up some Cabernet Sauvignon on gravelly soil before the latest ripening Merlot on limestone. So it's something which is quite new, because as Jane told before it was about we start here and we finish there. Every year is nearly the same way. So now we are very precise on the right ripening on each part of each property. So it makes something like that. Cabernet on gravelly soil sometimes pick up before some Merlot on limestones.
That's very interesting. I've got a very controversial question, but I'm going to throw it out there quickly. Based on all this new information that we have about terroir, will there ever be a reclassification of Bordeaux based uniquely on terroir?
I think we can say no.
Yeah,
Jane told before, it's not just by chance that some are first growth and other. It's question of historical image of their wine, and there's no mystery. The quality is really first linked to the ability of the soil to produce great berries and great wine.
You're right. So I guess in one way we can say there has already been a classification of Bordeaux done on its terroir in that it was a huge part of why the wine was good and why it was selling well. But I would say to specifically do it, we've all seen the centimillion issues of redoing classifications, and now people are very happy to call their lawyer and see. So I think we'll be waiting a long time before there's an official reclassification.
That's a very good answer, Jane. I just wanted to pop on because it's the top of the hour. So I wanted to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of Exploring the Wine Glass. Thanks for listening. If you have suggestions on what topics you would like me to discuss, please reach out on social media. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Exploring the Wine Glass. I'm also on LinkedIn as Lori Hoyt Budd. Of course, you can always email me at exploringthewineglass@gmail.com. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe to help others find me more easily. And most importantly, tell your wine-loving friends, because if you like the podcast, they will too. Podcast music is Wine by Kevens. Until next week, Sláinte.